The strange thing about coming home after 10 years away is that your memories arrive before you do. I remember thinking that as the plane descended through the gray Seattle clouds on a cold November afternoon in 2025. My forehead rested against the window while rain streaked across the glass in crooked lines, blurring the city below into soft patches of light and shadow. Somewhere down there was Emily. Somewhere down there was the little blue two-story house on Pine Ridge Drive that I'd spent a decade dreaming about during 12-hour shifts in the Qatar oil fields. 10 years of scorching heat. 10 years of sandstorms that coated your teeth by noon. 10 years of sleeping in metal housing units while promising myself it would all be worth it someday. The captain announced the outside temperature was 43 degrees, and for the first time in years, cold air sounded beautiful to me. I smiled like an idiot while people around me grabbed luggage from overhead bins and rushed to leave. They were probably heading home from business trips or vacations. For me, this wasn't a trip. This was the end of an entire life. I had finished my final overseas contract 3 days earlier after almost a decade working petroleum infrastructure projects across the Middle East. I was done. No more 6-month rotations. No more missed anniversaries over video calls. No more waking up at 3 a.m. Seattle time just to catch Emily before work. I had almost $400,000 in savings, a paid-off mortgage, and retirement investments that meant neither of us would ever have to struggle again. All I wanted now was my wife. Emily thought I wasn't coming home until Christmas. That was the plan I'd told her 2 months earlier during one of our rushed Sunday calls. She sounded distracted that night, apologizing because papers needed grading before Monday morning classes. She taught 4th grade at an elementary school outside Tacoma and always brought work home. I remembered hearing the microwave beep in the background while she talked. Normal sounds. Domestic sounds. The kind of sounds I missed more than anything. But I'd changed the plan after my final contract. Bonus cleared. I wanted to surprise her. I wanted one perfect moment after all these years apart. I'd spent nearly $6,000 in the Doha airport before boarding the flight. A diamond necklace from Tiffany. First-class tickets for a Hawaii vacation I planned to reveal on our anniversary. A leather-bound photo album filled with printed screenshots from 10 years of video calls because Emily once told me she was afraid we'd someday forget the little moments. I even bought the expensive cologne she liked back when we were 27 and broke and living in our first apartment with mismatched furniture from Craigslist. During the 14-hour flight, I barely slept. I kept imagining her face when I walked through the front door. Emily crying. Laughing. Throwing her arms around my neck. Maybe calling me an idiot for not warning her first. I replayed the fantasy so many times it felt real already. By the time I stepped into Seattle-Tacoma Airport, dragging 2 heavy suitcases behind me, my chest actually hurt from anticipation. The airport smelled like coffee and wet jackets. Outside, rain drizzled across the pickup lanes while headlights reflected off black pavement. I called Emily once from baggage claim, smiling to myself when it went to voicemail after 3 rings. Probably teaching late conferences, I thought. Or driving home. I left no message. I wanted the surprise intact. The Uber driver was an older guy named Leonard who spent most of the 40-minute ride talking about Seahawks football while soft jazz played through the speakers. I barely listened. My attention stayed fixed on the familiar road sliding past the windows. Grocery stores I recognized. Gas stations where Emily and I used to stop for snacks during late-night drives. The same billboard for personal injury lawyers still standing near exit 14 after all these years. It felt surreal how normal everything looked while my entire life was about to begin again. Then we turned onto Pine Ridge Drive, and something cold settled quietly into my stomach before I even understood why. The first thing I noticed was the security gate. Pine Ridge Drive had never been the kind of neighborhood where people installed iron gates with keypad access. 10 years ago, kids rode bicycles down these sidewalks until sunset while neighbors left Christmas decorations out so long the rain faded them white by February. But now a tall black gate stood across the driveway to my house, sleek and expensive with stone pillars on both sides and security cameras mounted above them. Leonard slowed the Uber beside the curb and glanced at the address on his phone. "You sure this is the right place?" he asked. I did not answer immediately because suddenly I was not sure of anything. The house itself looked familiar in shape only. The old faded blue siding Emily and I painted ourselves during our second summer of marriage was gone, replaced by smooth gray panels with crisp white trim and modern black framed windows. The front porch where Emily used to drink coffee in oversized sweatshirts on rainy mornings had been completely rebuilt with polished cedar beams and recessed lighting glowing warm against the drizzle. Even the landscaping looked different. The little rose bushes Emily planted near the mailbox were gone. In their place stood perfectly trimmed hedges and decorative stonework that looked like something copied from a luxury home magazine. "Yeah," I finally said quietly. "This is it." But it did not feel like it anymore. Leonard helped unload my luggage onto the wet sidewalk while rain misted through the streetlights in silver streaks. Across the road, a woman walking a golden retriever slowed when she noticed me standing there staring at the house. She looked maybe late 50s, bundled in a dark raincoat with grocery bags hanging from one wrist. There was something strange in the way she watched me. Recognition mixed with confusion. Then her eyes widened slightly. "Oh my God," she said softly. "Daniel?" I squinted through the rain before recognizing her. Mrs. Harper. She used to live 3 houses down. Emily watered her plants when she traveled to Arizona every winter. Mrs. Harper looked from me to the house behind the gate, and the color seemed to drain from her face. I thought. She stopped herself awkwardly. "We have not seen you in years." "Yeah," I said with a small smile. I wanted to surprise Emily. The silence that followed lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it felt much longer. Mrs. Harper tightened her grip on the dog leash. The golden retriever sat quietly beside her, rain dripping from its fur. "Well," she finally said carefully, "I guess she is definitely getting a surprise." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten harder. Before I could ask what she meant, a younger voice called from somewhere nearby. "Mom, hurry up." I turned and saw a little boy standing in the driveway next door holding a basketball under one arm. He looked maybe 9 years old. Blonde hair. Seahawks hoodie 2 sizes too big. He stared at me openly the way kids do when they are trying to figure out if someone belongs somewhere. Then he asked the question that made the cold in my chest spread everywhere else. "Are you the old owner?" Mrs. Harper immediately looked horrified. "Evan," she snapped. "That is rude." But the boy only frowned in confusion. "That is what Mr. Langston calls him." My pulse slowed in a strange unnatural way. "Mr. Langston?" I repeated. Mrs. Harper forced a quick nervous smile. "Kids hear things and repeat them. You know how it is." She practically dragged the boy away after that, muttering goodnight over her shoulder without meeting my eyes again. I stood there alone on the sidewalk while rain collected on my jacket and rolled down the back of my neck. The house lights glowed warm behind expensive curtains I had never seen before. Parked inside the driveway beyond the gate sat a black Range Rover and a silver Mercedes sedan with temporary plates. Neither car belonged to Emily. I knew that for certain because Emily hated large vehicles. She once drove 40 minutes out of the way just to avoid parallel parking downtown. Slowly, I picked up my suitcases and walked toward the gate keypad while a terrible feeling whispered quietly in the back of my mind that maybe I had not come home at all. Rain tapped softly against the metal gate while I stood there trying to remember the access code Emily and I used to use for everything. Our anniversary. June 17th. I typed 0617 into the keypad. Red light. Invalid. Code. My stomach tightened a little more. I tried her birthday next. Then mine. Nothing. The gate remained locked while water dripped from my hair onto the collar of my jacket. For a second I just stood there staring at the house, feeling ridiculous with 2 suitcases beside me and a Tiffany gift bag hanging from my wrist like some exhausted salesman who had arrived at the wrong address. Then headlights swept across the wet street behind me. Another car slowed as it passed the house. I noticed the driver glance toward me curiously before continuing down the block. That was when I realized something embarrassing. From the outside, I probably looked like a stranger trying to get into somebody else's property. I pulled my phone from my pocket and called Emily again. Straight to voicemail. I listened to her recorded greeting for the first time in years instead of hanging up immediately. "Hi, you have reached Emily Carter. I cannot get to the phone right now, but leave a message." Her voice sounded lighter than I remembered. Happier somehow. I almost left a message telling her I was outside, but something stopped me. Maybe pride. Maybe fear. Instead, I hung up and walked around the side fence toward the backyard gate. 10 years earlier, I installed that side latch myself after raccoons kept getting into our trash bins. The old cedar fence had been replaced too. Taller now. Dark stained wood with polished steel hardware. Everything looked expensive. Controlled. Perfect. The backyard lights were on. Through the rain-speckled glass doors, I could see part of the kitchen glowing warm gold against white marble countertops that definitely had not existed when I left. Emily and I used to joke about marble counters while watching home renovation shows because we could barely afford decent groceries back then. Yet now the kitchen looked like something from those same shows. I moved closer slowly, not wanting to look like I was spying on my own home, but unable to stop myself either. Inside, someone had set the dining table for dinner. 4 wine glasses. Cloth napkins folded perfectly. Candles burning near the centerpiece. Soft jazz drifted faintly through the glass along with the sound of laughter. Emily's laughter. My chest tightened instantly because I knew that laugh better than my own heartbeat. She always laughed hardest when she was nervous or trying too hard to impress people. Then I heard a man's voice. Calm. Deep. Comfortable. Not the voice of a guest. The voice of someone completely at home there. "You worry too much," he said. "Tonight is going to go perfectly." Emily laughed again, quieter this time. "You say that every time." I froze beside the glass door while rainwater soaked through my shoes. I could not see them clearly from this angle, only reflections moving across the polished kitchen surfaces. But hearing another man's voice inside my house after 10 years away felt strangely unreal, like my brain refused to process it completely. Maybe it was a contractor. Maybe family. Maybe someone from the neighborhood helping with renovations. I grabbed onto every possible explanation because the alternative felt impossible. Then the man spoke again. "Did you tell him yet?" Silence followed. Not long. Maybe 3 seconds. But long enough to make something heavy settle inside my chest. Finally Emily answered quietly, "No. And I am not discussing this tonight." The man sighed softly. "Emily." I said no. Her voice sharpened just enough for me to hear the tension underneath it. I stepped back from the glass instinctively, my pulse suddenly loud in my ears. At that exact moment, movement appeared upstairs through one of the second-floor windows. A shadow crossing a bedroom I no longer recognized. And somehow, standing there in the rain outside my own home, I realized I was afraid to walk through the front door. For almost a full minute, I stayed hidden beside the backyard fence listening to rainwater drip from the roof gutters while my thoughts spiraled in circles. Part of me wanted to walk away and book a hotel room until morning. Another part wanted to march straight through the front door and demand answers immediately. But underneath both reactions was something worse than anger. Confusion. Deep, hollow confusion that made me feel disconnected from my own body. Nothing about this felt real yet. Maybe there was still an explanation I had not seen. Maybe I was misunderstanding everything. I kept thinking that over and over while staring through the kitchen windows at blurred reflections moving inside. Then the back patio light suddenly clicked on. I stepped away from the glass instinctively just as the sliding door opened. Cold air drifted outside along with the smell of roasted garlic and wine. A man walked onto the patio holding a phone against his ear. Tall. Broad shoulders. Mid-40s maybe. Dark wool coat over a fitted button-down shirt. The kind of polished appearance that instantly communicates money without trying too hard. Rain misted across his neatly styled gray hair while he paced slowly near the outdoor fireplace Emily and I could never afford to build back when I lived there. Tomorrow morning works, he said calmly into the phone. No, move the escrow meeting to 11. Emily has the school fundraiser tonight. He paused, listening. Yes, I know the numbers. Just have Diane send me the revised documents before 9. His voice carried the relaxed confidence of someone used to being obeyed. He ended the call and stood there for a moment scrolling through messages on his phone while I remained frozen in the shadows beside the fence. Then he did something that made my stomach drop completely. He reached casually into his pocket, pulled out a set of keys, and pressed a button that locked the front gate. The headlights on the black Range Rover flashed in response. Not a guest. Not a contractor. Not temporary. He moved like a man protecting his own home. Before I could process that thought fully, Emily appeared in the doorway behind him. My chest tightened so sharply it almost hurt. She looked different. Beautiful, but different in ways I could not immediately explain. Her hair was shorter now, styled carefully around her shoulders instead of the messy ponytails she used to wear grading papers at the kitchen table. She wore fitted cream-colored pants and a soft sweater that probably cost more than half the clothes I owned overseas. Even the way she carried herself had changed. More polished. More composed. Like someone who had learned how to belong in expensive rooms. She smiled at the man softly. Are they still coming? Running 15 minutes late, he answered. Then he reached out naturally and brushed rainwater from her sleeve. Such a small gesture. Casual. Familiar. Intimate in a way that hit harder than anything dramatic could have. Emily glanced toward the dark backyard suddenly, and for one terrifying second I thought she saw me standing there. But her eyes passed over me without recognition. Without even the instinct that someone familiar was nearby. You should go change before they arrive, the man said quietly. You have been stressed all week. Emily exhaled tiredly and leaned briefly against his shoulder. I just want tonight over with. He smiled faintly. After tomorrow, everything gets easier. Tomorrow. The word echoed in my head immediately. What was happening tomorrow? Before I could think further, Emily stepped back inside while the man remained on the patio a few seconds longer. He looked out across the rain-dark backyard thoughtfully, then turned and followed her into the house. The sliding glass door shut behind him. I stayed motionless beside the fence while warm light glowed through windows that no longer felt connected to me at all. Then through the downstairs hallway, I caught sight of something that made my pulse stop completely. Hanging on the wall beside the staircase was a massive framed photograph of Emily standing beside that man at some mountain resort, both of them smiling at each other like a married couple. I do not know how long I stood out there in the rain staring through those windows. Time felt strange suddenly, stretched thin between disbelief and exhaustion. Part of me kept waiting to wake up somewhere over the Atlantic with airplane turbulence shaking my seat. Because the alternative meant accepting something my mind still refused to hold on to completely. Emily had built an entirely different life while I was gone. And somehow everyone around me seemed to know except me. My fingers felt numb against the handle of my suitcase as I slowly moved along the side of the house toward the garage. The motion happened automatically, almost instinctively, like my body was searching for something familiar to prove I still belonged there. The old keypad mounted beside the garage door had been replaced with a touchscreen panel glowing pale blue in the darkness. I stared at it for several seconds before trying the old entry code anyway. 2714, the address of our first apartment together near Tacoma Community College. Emily used to tease me for using sentimental passwords. The screen flashed green. I froze. Then slowly, almost silently, the garage door began lifting upward. Warm light spilled across the wet driveway while my pulse hammered so hard I could hear it in my ears. Inside sat the black Range Rover and the silver Mercedes. Polished. Spotless. Expensive enough that together they probably cost more than my father earned in 5 years at the paper mill where he worked before retiring. But that was not what hit me hardest. It was the absence of my own life. The old workbench I built with Emily during our first year in the house was gone. My fishing gear. My snow tires. The rusted mini fridge full of cheap beer we used during Seahawks games. Gone. The garage looked like a luxury showroom now with epoxy-coated floors, custom cabinets, recessed lighting, and framed black and white photographs of mountain landscapes hanging where my tool racks used to be. Even the smell had changed. No sawdust. No motor oil. Just clean air and cedar. Slowly, I stepped inside and lowered the garage door behind me. Rain sounds disappeared instantly, replaced by soft music drifting faintly from somewhere inside the house. I recognized the song after a moment. Frank Sinatra. Emily used to play old jazz albums on Sunday mornings while cleaning the kitchen. Hearing it now felt almost cruel. I moved carefully through the garage toward the interior door leading into the mudroom. Every step felt wrong, like trespassing in a stranger's home despite knowing legally this property still belonged to me. When I opened the door quietly, warm air wrapped around me carrying the smell of rosemary, wine, and candle wax. Voices floated from somewhere deeper in the house. Multiple people now. Dinner guests. I slipped my shoes off automatically on the mat beside the door before realizing. There were no familiar shoes there anymore. Instead, expensive leather boots and women's heels lined custom shelves beneath hanging coats I had never seen before. Then my eyes landed on a framed photograph sitting atop a console table near the hallway. Emily stood smiling beside the same gray-haired man from the patio. Behind them stretched snow-covered mountains beneath a bright blue sky. Aspen, maybe. Both wore matching winter coats and dark sunglasses while his arm rested comfortably around her waist. She looked genuinely happy. Not forced. Not trapped. Happy. Beneath the photograph sat a silver plaque engraved with elegant cursive lettering. Victor and Emily. Winter Gala Weekend. February 2024. My chest tightened so sharply I had to grip the edge of the table for balance. Victor. So that was his name. I stared at the photograph while muffled laughter echoed from the dining room nearby. Then I heard Emily's voice more clearly than before. He used to love this wine, she said softly. My entire body went still. A man answered her immediately. Victor. Then tonight is fitting. Silence followed for a second before Emily spoke again, quieter this time. I still do not know if this is the right thing. Victor's voice lowered enough that I could barely hear him. Tomorrow changes everything. After that, the past stays where it belongs. At that exact moment, footsteps started moving toward the hallway. I barely had time to react before a woman appeared at the end of the hallway carrying an empty wine bottle. She stopped so suddenly her entire body stiffened. For a second neither of us moved. She looked around 30, maybe a neighbor or one of the dinner guests, wearing a dark green dress and holding the bottle loosely against her chest while confusion spread across her face. I realized instantly what I must have looked like standing there soaked from the rain with travel clothes wrinkled from a 14-hour flight and a suitcase still beside the mudroom doorway. Can I help you? She asked carefully. My mouth went dry. Every possible answer felt wrong. Before I could respond, voices echoed from the dining room behind her. Claire, did you find the opener? Victor called out casually. The woman glanced back over her shoulder. Yeah, she answered automatically, though she still had not taken her eyes off me. I think someone is here. The atmosphere in the house changed instantly. The soft dinner noise faded. Chairs moved. Footsteps approached. Then Victor appeared in the hallway beside the woman. He stopped immediately when he saw me. For the first time all night, I watched his calm confidence crack slightly. Not panic. More like sudden calculation. His eyes moved over me quickly, taking in the luggage, the soaked jacket, my face. I knew the exact second he realized who I was because his expression shifted into something controlled and cautious. Behind him, Emily stepped into view carrying folded napkins in both hands. The moment her eyes met mine, the napkins slipped from her fingers and scattered across the hardwood floor. Nobody spoke. I cannot fully explain what it feels like watching the person you spent 10 years missing suddenly look terrified to see you. Not shocked. Not emotional. Terrified. Emily's face drained of color while one hand instinctively gripped the hallway wall beside her. For a few seconds the only sound came from Sinatra playing softly somewhere in the kitchen. Daniel, she whispered finally, and hearing my name in her voice after all those years nearly broke something inside me. I wanted her to run toward me. I wanted anger or tears or anything that proved I still belonged somewhere in her life. Instead she just stood there frozen like someone caught in the middle of a disaster they had spent years trying to avoid. Victor recovered first. I think, he said calmly, stepping slightly in front of the others, we should move this conversation somewhere private. Private. The word hit me strangely considering I was standing inside my own house. I looked past them toward the dining room where 4 place settings waited beneath warm chandelier lighting. Crystal glasses. White candles. Expensive silverware Emily and I never owned. On the far wall hung another framed photograph of her and Victor at what looked like a charity gala in New York. Different seasons. Different clothes. Different versions of a life I knew nothing about. Who is that? The woman called Claire asked quietly behind Victor. Nobody answered her. Emily finally moved forward one slow step. Tears shimmered in her eyes now, though she still looked more overwhelmed than emotional. Daniel, she repeated softly. You were not supposed to be home yet. The sentence landed harder than any insult could have. Not welcome home. Not I missed you. Just shocked that I had arrived too early for whatever this was. I looked at Victor directly for the first time up close. Expensive watch. Perfect posture. Wedding band tan line on one finger though he wore no ring now. He carried himself like a man used to negotiating difficult situations professionally. You are Victor, I said quietly. His expression remained careful. Victor Langston. He extended a hand politely as though we were meeting at a business conference instead of inside the ruins of my marriage. I know this situation is probably overwhelming. I stared at his hand without moving. Somewhere deep inside me, anger was beginning to replace confusion now. Slow. Cold. Dangerous mostly because it felt so calm. Then my eyes shifted past him toward the staircase wall again where that giant framed photograph still hung beneath warm lighting like a monument to the life they built together. And that was when I noticed something even worse than the picture itself. The old wedding portrait of Emily and me was gone. The silence after that stretched so long it almost stopped feeling real. Claire quietly excused herself first, muttering something awkward about checking on the appetizers before disappearing back toward the dining room. I barely noticed her leave. My eyes stayed fixed on the empty space along the staircase wall where our wedding portrait used to hang. I remembered carrying that heavy frame into the house myself 11 years earlier while Emily laughed because I nearly dropped it trying to climb the stairs alone. She insisted the photo made the hallway feel like a real home. Now there was not even a mark left behind. Like our entire marriage had been carefully erased one piece at a time. Emily followed my stare and immediately looked down at the floor. Victor remained calm beside her, though I noticed subtle tension in his jaw now. He understood something important that Emily probably did not yet realize. I was not creating a scene. I was not yelling. The quieter a man becomes in moments like this, the more dangerous the truth usually is. Daniel, Emily said carefully after another long silence, please let us explain. Us. Not me. Us. I nodded slowly while setting the Tiffany gift bag down on the hallway table beside their framed aspen photograph. The blue ribbon looked absurd there, like something delivered years too late. How long? I asked quietly. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Victor answered instead. This is not the right way to discuss everything. I looked directly at him. I was not asking you. His expression tightened slightly for the first time all night. Emily wrapped her arms around herself like she suddenly felt cold. It did not happen the way you think, she whispered. I almost laughed at that because I genuinely did not know what to think anymore. My mind kept drifting between memories that no longer matched reality. Emily crying at the airport the first time I left for Qatar. Emily mailing handwritten letters sprayed with perfume because she said video calls were not enough. Emily promising me we were building a future together. Meanwhile another man had apparently been living inside that future for years. Then explain it, I said. My voice sounded strangely calm even to myself. Because from where I am standing, it looks like I spent 10 years funding a life that does not include me anymore. Emily flinched visibly. Victor stepped forward slightly. Daniel, emotions are high right now. Maybe it would be better if we sat down privately tomorrow morning after everyone leaves. Tomorrow morning again. The phrase hit me immediately. Everything tonight seemed connected to tomorrow. The dinner. The tension. The conversations I overheard. What happens tomorrow? I asked. Emily and Victor exchanged a quick glance that lasted maybe half a second, but it told me more than either of them probably intended. Something important. Something legal maybe. Emily looked away first. It is complicated. No, I said softly. Complicated is forgetting an anniversary. This feels planned. The words hung heavily in the hallway. Somewhere in the dining room, silverware clinked awkwardly while guests pretended not to listen. Emily's eyes filled with tears now, but there was guilt in them too. Deep guilt. Not just over Victor. Over something larger. You stopped coming home, she whispered suddenly. Year after year there was always another contract. Another project. Another reason you had to stay longer. Her voice cracked slightly. Do you know what it feels like watching someone slowly disappear through a phone screen? The question hit harder than I expected because part of me already knew the answer. I had felt it too overseas during countless nights alone in metal housing units while Seattle moved on without me. Birthdays missed. Funerals attended through video calls. Entire seasons of life reduced to unstable internet connections and rushed conversations before shifts. For the first time since walking into the house, uncertainty crept into my anger. Maybe I had been gone too long. Maybe I had mistaken sacrifice for love without realizing the damage underneath it. Emily saw hesitation cross my face and stepped closer carefully. I waited for you, she said quietly. For years, Daniel. Then Victor's phone buzzed loudly in his pocket. He glanced down at the screen, and for the first time that composed expression slipped completely. Whatever message he saw instantly changed the atmosphere in the room. Victor stared at his phone for only a second before locking the screen and slipping it back into his pocket, but the damage was already done. That brief crack in his composure changed the energy in the hallway completely. Emily noticed it too. What happened? She asked quietly. Nothing urgent, Victor answered too quickly. I will handle it later. But something in his voice sounded tighter now, distracted in a way it had not been before. I watched both of them carefully while pieces of the night slowly rearranged themselves in my head. Tomorrow mattered. Whatever was happening tomorrow had both of them nervous, and suddenly I no longer believed I had walked into a simple affair. This felt larger. More organized somehow. "You said you waited for me," I said to Emily after a long silence. "So when exactly did waiting turn into this?" Her face crumpled slightly at the word "this." She glanced toward the dining room where muted conversation had started again among the guests, pretending not to notice the disaster unfolding down the hallway. "Can we please not do this in front of everyone?" she whispered. "Everyone?" I repeated softly. "Emily, I do not even know who everyone is anymore." That seemed to hit her hard because tears finally slid down her cheeks. For a moment she looked like the woman I remembered again instead of the polished stranger standing in expensive clothes beneath warm chandelier lighting. "You left for 2 years, she said quietly. "Then it became 4. Then 6. Every time you came home, you were already thinking about leaving again." I opened my mouth to argue, but the truth caught in my throat first. There had always been another contract. Another opportunity. Another excuse about building security for our future. I remembered promising Emily each extension would be the last one. I also remembered how relieved I felt every time another overseas bonus cleared our accounts. It was easier convincing myself sacrifice meant love when the bank balance kept growing. Emily wiped her eyes carefully. "Do you know how many holidays I spent alone in this house?" she asked. "How many nights I sat at that kitchen table talking to you through unstable internet while pretending it still felt like a marriage?" Her voice shook harder now. "You missed my mother's funeral, Daniel." Guilt punched through me immediately because I had missed it. A pipeline emergency delayed my flight out of Doha 2 years earlier, and by the time I landed in Seattle the service was already over. Emily never truly forgave me for that. Maybe she could not. "I know," I said quietly. "I know I failed you there." Victor stayed silent beside her, but I noticed the subtle way Emily leaned closer toward him unconsciously, like his presence stabilized her now. That hurt more than the accusations. Not because she loved someone else. Because she trusted someone else. "Victor was there," she whispered. "When nobody else was." I looked at him again. He met my stare evenly without arrogance this time. "Emily was isolated," he said calmly. "You may not have intended it, but she was alone for a very long time." I hated hearing him say it because part of me feared he was right. The years overseas had blurred together until even my visits home started feeling temporary. I had told myself endurance was romantic. That suffering apart proved commitment. Standing there now, I suddenly wondered if I had slowly abandoned my marriage without realizing it. Emily stepped closer carefully. "I never planned any of this," she said. "At first Victor was just helping with legal issues after my mother passed away. Then the house renovation started. Then," she stopped herself, unable to finish. "Then you stopped needing me?" I asked quietly. Emily's eyes widened immediately. "No. That is not fair." "Is it not?" The words came out calmer than I felt. Because beneath the heartbreak, another emotion was growing now. Suspicion. Small details kept pulling at me in ways I could not explain. The security gates. The hidden tension. Tomorrow's meeting. The way Victor reacted to that message. Even now, despite Emily defending him, something about the situation felt carefully controlled rather than emotional. Then I noticed Victor glance toward the dining room again, almost checking whether anyone could overhear us. And that was when I realized the dinner guests were not friends or neighbors at all. Every single person sitting at that table wore business attire. Once I noticed the business attire, I could not unsee it. Through the dining room entrance, I studied the guests more carefully while Victor and Emily stood tense beside me in the hallway. 3 men. 1 woman. All dressed like they had stepped out of corporate boardrooms instead of arriving for a casual dinner party in suburban Seattle. Expensive suits. Leather portfolios resting beside chairs. Phones constantly lighting up near folded napkins and half-finished wine glasses. Nobody laughed naturally anymore. They were listening. Waiting. The atmosphere felt less like a social gathering and more like people stalling before an important meeting. "Who are they?" I asked quietly. Emily hesitated. Victor answered first. "Business associates." "For what business?" Another pause. Emily finally spoke. "Daniel, tonight was not supposed to happen like this." There it was again. Not supposed to happen. Like my arrival had interrupted something carefully scheduled. I looked around the house one more time, noticing details that had seemed random before now connecting together in unsettling ways. Renovations. Security systems. Legal conversations. Tomorrow morning meetings. Business dinners inside my home. And through all of it, Emily looked nervous rather than happy. That realization stayed with me strongest of all. If this were simply a new relationship, why did she seem afraid every time tomorrow came up? Victor checked his watch. "We should finish this conversation privately later tonight," he said. "There are contracts that still need signatures." Contracts. The word landed heavily between us. Emily immediately looked toward him with visible tension. "Victor," she said quietly, warningly. He ignored her and looked directly at me instead. "Daniel, I understand this situation is emotional, but there are legal processes already in motion. Nobody intended for you to walk into this unexpectedly." Legal processes. My exhaustion suddenly vanished beneath a rush of adrenaline. "What legal processes?" I asked. Emily stepped forward quickly. "Nothing is finalized yet." Finalized. The hallway felt colder despite the warm lights glowing overhead. I stared at her, trying to understand how the woman who once cried because I missed one anniversary dinner had somehow become a stranger discussing finalized legal processes inside our house with another man standing beside her. Then another thought hit me hard enough to make my stomach drop. "Emily," I said slowly, "did you file for divorce?" Tears immediately filled her eyes again, but she still did not answer. That silence told me everything. Somewhere behind us, one of the dinner guests stood awkwardly from the table and muttered something about making a phone call outside. Nobody stopped him. Victor exhaled quietly like a man realizing events were slipping beyond his control. "This conversation should not happen while everyone is here," he said calmly. "Then send them home," I replied. Victor studied me carefully for a second. I could almost see him reassessing the situation in real time. Maybe he expected rage. Maybe humiliation. Instead I just felt hollow now, like my body had not fully caught up to what my mind was learning. Emily wrapped her arms around herself again. "I tried reaching you so many times," she whispered suddenly. "After my mother died, after the refinancing problem started, after the tax notices," I frowned immediately. "What refinancing problems?" She blinked in confusion. "The house. We almost lost it 3 years ago." I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "I wired money every month." Emily looked equally confused now. "Not enough after the loan restructuring." Loan restructuring. Tax notices. None of this made sense. I had sent more money home than we ever spent before I left. Enough to pay off the original mortgage years ago. Victor stepped in carefully. "Daniel, financial matters became more complicated over time." Emily was under significant pressure. Something cold settled into my chest then. Not heartbreak this time. Suspicion. Real suspicion. Because suddenly I realized there were entire years of financial decisions and legal changes connected to my own property that I knew absolutely nothing about. And judging by the tension spreading across Victor's face, he understood I was beginning to notice the same thing. Thank you for listening to this story, and if you want to find out what Daniel discovers next inside his own house, make sure to follow the channel and leave a like so you do not miss the next part.